So tomorrow evening under lights at 8 o'clock, Ireland take on Australia before a packed Aviva, and Andy Farrell is going for it. He's picked his strongest team. Brian O'Driscoll, good afternoon, good evening, how are you?
Good afternoon, good evening, Ger. All good, thank you.
There was some sense that maybe he might risk playing some non-frontline players, and it's like, nah, we want to be the best team in the world at the end of the year. This is who we are, come and beat us.
Yeah, it's kind of true to form, to be honest with you. That has been kind of his modus operandi for the last 18 months, playing strong teams. And it was about setting a tone and building on a reputation and not wanting to give a yard to anyone given an opportunity to kind of knock them off the perch that they're on at the moment as number one, but also reinforcing the consideration that every side has to give to Ireland now over the course of the next year going into the World Cup, that they are a team to be reckoned with, and that first team is very, very strong. Of course, in the same breath, there's always the nervousness around the string of injuries and those, reserve players not having the same game time. We're always going to have that predicament, and we'll be able to make our decisions based on retrospective viewing of the scenario. Come France in September, October of next year, but. You live in hope that you're going to have a pretty clean bill of health, and as a result, it'll mean that the stronger team is out and we'll get to present the best of ourselves. On the other side, you'll get lambasted for not giving other guys an opportunity. That's the role of a coach.
Yeah, I think at this point, he's earned the right to do what it is that he's choosing to do. Whatever decision he makes, given the quality that they've played over the last 18 months in particular, and how quickly the style is bedded in, and how well coached the A team seemed in New Zealand, and how quickly, when they have made changes, those players have stepped up. So, if he decides that the right thing to do is to make the team feel like they're full of confidence and momentum, well, then that's his decision.
Yeah, it is, and he'll have to stand over that. I think in all scenarios, you could have looked at this, you could have looked at a complete change, you could have looked at a halfway house of certain personnel coming in, and you could argue the fact that there potentially still are. You look at Jimmy O'Brien coming in. I think one position, if I was, looking at it, what you're going to get from Cian Healy. I think Jeremy Loughman, having had a reasonable outing last week against a lesser Fijian team, probably if he's in your considerations for getting in of that final front row spot, would he not have benefited from sitting on the bench in a kind of a more high end fast tempo international test match that he wouldn't have experienced previously? Probably, but beyond that, it's hard to kind of pick too many faults. Through fortune or misfortune, Jack Crowley's going to get another opportunity. Depending on how the game goes, will Johnny see the full 80 out? Maybe we'll get 10 or 20 minutes out of Crowley against better opposition, who now does look like he's the third option for us. The other boys have been given their opportunities. They haven't taken it, and he absolutely deserves a chance to be that third choice. But then there's, it's mad. There's certain guys that are forgotten men, a bit like Mike Lowry. A year ago was hotly tipped as potentially, being involved in that squad, and he hasn't gotten any game time. And obviously there's the other back three players, Earls and Conway, and these guys, Stockdale, that just through injury haven't been in the reckoning. And it just shows how much the guy in possession is a powerful position, and why you don't ever want to relinquish it through. And that's why guys lie about being 100% fit when they're 80% fit, because give someone else an opportunity, they shine well in it. It's very hard to not pick them next time round.
Is there any case to be made for more experimentation than we're seeing? What do you think the conversation was like when he was like, look, this is the team I want to pick in that selection room? Is anybody in the room going, let's try something totally different? Let's try playing with 2 sevens this week. Let's try playing with Tyke Byrne in the back row. Let's not just try and win this game for the sake of winning the game, but let's also try and learn a bit more about our team.
I'll tell you who's saying that is the guys that haven't been selected. And the guys that have been selected are saying, well done, coach, good decision. And the coaches, they want to win too. And listen, it's been a formula that's worked well for them. And it's hard to break away from that. And you do want to finish the year as number one, and you do want to go to the World Rugby Awards on Sunday and, be up for Team of the Year and Coach of the Year and have World Player of the Year in the mix. You do. That's the reality of it. We're a small country, and I don't want to play that, get the violin out, but when we do achieve high achievements like we have done this year, you got to enjoy it, because it's not a yearly thing for us. We're not the All Blacks. Hopefully we're here to stay for longer this time up at the top of the tree. But, this year doesn't really matter. Can we be top of the tree this time next year?
This is essentially the last game where you could have experimented, maybe with the exception of the Italy game, although again Italy's improvement suggests that you wouldn't be experimenting too much in the Six Nations, because we as a country have decided that the Six Nations is very important to us for all sorts of reasons: historic, sponsorship, prize money. And then that's it, really. There'll be some pre-World Cup warm-ups that no one cares about apart from the players who are involved. But this is it. This is the last game that isn't like full-bore Six Nations before we kick off the World Cup next year.
Yeah, it is. And it does feel like it is the last opportunity to properly try players. And it just shows that, he's adamant that this is the route that he wants to go, and that he's going for broke. And maybe we are a country that need to go for broke if we are to win a World Cup, that we can't hedge our bets and we can't try and, we will need an insane amount of good fortune to get to a semi-final, a World Cup final, win a final next year. You'll need a very low injury count. That's the reality of it, because our top grade players, our first 15, are in some cases a lot better than the next in line, and we just can't afford to lose them. And that's all. I don't know when that's not going to be a reality in Ireland, because of our playing numbers, because of the amount we have to choose from comparatively to a New Zealand or a France or an England, where there's just significantly bigger player pool to choose from. So it's a brave route that he's going, and one that will create an awful lot of discussion over the course of the next year. Have we done enough to build someone behind Johnny Sexton if we do lose him? Unfortunately, in one of the warm-up games early on in the tournament, have we given Carberry and Crowley enough time? The answer is no, but we put a lot of eggs into that, and he's delivered for a long period of time, and he's been a big part of getting us to number one. And then, there's those conversations you can have in lots of other positions. But then at the same time, if you look at the bench, right, like McCarthy, lots of people would say, what has McCarthy done, for province or for Irish selection to truly warrant getting there? Okay. Some development tour games, which I'm not overly privy to be honest with you. But yet he's showing something at training. He's showing an edge that the coaches really like. So definitely feels as though he's going to be part of their plans in that second row position. And then, Casey obviously has gotten in because of Murray's injuries. He's taken advantage of misfortune for Connor, but he needs that game opportunity as well if he does come on against good opposition, because you'd have to imagine that we will be picking 3 scrum halves. So not through any choice of the coaches, but actually their hand has been dealt in a couple of positions which actually will serve them well too.
There's a few players obviously who are playing at such an elite level that if we were to lose them, our level drops. Obviously Sexton is one, Gibson Park you'd say is another. Josh van der Fleer seems significantly further ahead than any of the rivals for the 7 position at the moment.
I'd argue Porter as well.
Well, I was going to say Furlong as well. Like, is there a case for Furlong and Porter to be rested or wrapped up in cotton wool? Have a long Christmas, lads. Come back to us in late February, maybe March. You can play the last 2 games. I'm just trying to see.
Front rowers never need a long Christmas, that's for sure. That is one thing, when in your press conference you're talking about dreaming about spuds and gravy, that guy needs to play as much rugby as he possibly can. So no, that's not the way these guys work either. Like this, Porter, you see them thriving on game time. Their injury profiles are reasonable. Obviously Porter's had a couple of serious ones, likewise, not maybe to the same degree with Furlong, but their front row guys tend to be players that progress and get better with more game time, with minutes under their belts. I think it's more challenging for them to come in because of their sheer mass and size and the technicalities around what they have to do on the field, for them to dip in and out. Whereas you've got a tried and tested, be it a Johnny or a Robbie Henshaw or a back three player that can work on all of that skill set at training and almost have a kind of a match simulation type burst beforehand in the weeks leading up to playing. But in reality, you can't do that as a front rower. And so I think that's why they need just minutes on the park and to keep them sharp.
When Stuart McCluskey went off against South Africa, I think people genuinely felt really sorry for him, because it looked like he'd done himself some fairly significant shoulder, clavicle, something that was going to keep him out for a while. And then lo and behold, he's back and he's got another opportunity, and he's going to be playing essentially in the first choice team. So it's a real moment for him to say, actually, I'm worthy of my place on the bench if Henshaw is fit, and I'm going to push like mad over the next 6 months to try and convince you that when we're playing South Africa, you want me in the side, because I'm like 20 kilos heavier than Damian Dialende and I can smash him the way nobody else can. So it's a chance of a lifetime, literally the chance of a lifetime for him tomorrow.
Huge game for him. Huge game. And I've had my concerns with him in the past, and I think I've had these kind of long ongoing conversations with supporters from Ulster, that can't make sense of the fact that Stuart McCluskey doesn't have more caps. And I just thought, it's unfair to say that he was a one-trick pony about his ability to carry over the advantage line, but I have to say he does come across now as one of the best improved players on this island in the last year. I think he's got way more dimensions to his game, that offloading ability. I think he's now incredibly good at taking the ball to the line and carrying it, but also taking the ball to the line, carrying hard and pulling that pass out the back with the exact same look to the defence. And a man of his size has got to sit individuals down. And if you can get other good runners running off him and he's able to pull that ball out the back, he's going to create space. So I think there's been a big step up in evolution to his game. There are question marks around his work rate, how he dipped in and out of games in the past. His defence has been very good. I think that part of his game is really good. He just now needs a monster game for Ireland, because ultimately I think you're going to see Gary Ringrose and Robbie Henshaw being down as the two centres. If Jimmy O'Brien can travel within a 33-man squad as a kind of quasi back three and centre option, well, that's the fourth centre that you could plug in there. So then it does feel as though it's going to be Bundy Aki or Stuart McCluskey in that final centre berth, which Bundy, more recently would never have thought the case, because he was he was pushing to be number one within the starting team. And now I get the sense that it does feel that Robbie is still very much number one. Gary's number 113. And so who does make up the others as well? And it can't have been easy viewing for Bundy, seeing Robbie getting injured, Stuart getting his opportunity, then going well against Fiji, and now getting picked against Australia, where he'll relish the opportunity of having one of his big games and really put down a marker.
It is the level of competition that you really, really want this far out from the World Cup, but also generally the fact that there is proper strength and depth from players who can seamlessly fit in. And it seems like we're getting there, certainly with the wingers. I'm not quite sure if we are at fullback. Hugo Keenan has been indestructible, touch wood, so far in his Ireland career, up until the last few months that he missed, and then miraculously he's back and ready to go as soon as the big games start again.
He's the prime example, though, Ger, as well, of what we were talking about, of a guy that has an ability to be able to not play any rugby and then fit in again. All of his skills he could practice. He's got this huge engine, but catching and kicking and positional sense, you can do all of that in training. You can't do that stuff as a front rower. So that's why there's certain positions that are able to come straight back in and not need massive game time, particularly if they have know-how, as Johnny does, or if they have that massive engine like Robbie Henshaw and Hugo Keenan have.
Do we have any Hugo Keenan substitute, replacement, backup?
Is it Jimmy O'Brien? No. Is he now all of a sudden the guy that we have comfort with? I think he's a lovely, lovely footballer. One really interesting question. I had a friend text me after the South African game, and he said, there's been so many heirs to the throne, but is Jimmy O'Brien the heir to the Johnny Sexton throne? You know, he played 10 for Newbridge in school. It feels like he could play anywhere across the back line because he's a footballer. He could play wing, full back, centre. We've seen, you'd have to imagine if you gave him a run of games at 10, he'd be incredibly proficient. Now, maybe that's a stretch. I don't know, is that something that would interest him in any shape or form? I don't know whether he can goal kick or not, but that's just another added thought to inclusion within a World Cup squad. You know, is there a chance that he could play 10 in one of the early World Cup games if he really had to, or if there was an injury to Sexton or to Carberry, could he fit in there? And if so, well, he's the perfect hybrid player that is going to get selected on this World Cup team squad, provided he stays fit and he continues in this kind of rich vein of form that he's in. But yet it's more challenging for him to actually get selected in the starting 15.
Okay, one last thing then about this before we move on. The performance of Gibson Park when he came on after 37 or however long it was in that first game against South Africa, it was mesmerising. Like, we were behind the goals watching in the second half, and you could just see him run into this space and realise, oh, it's like there's a force field around me at the moment. This is glorious. I have the freedom of the Aviva, and then we score the try off the back of it. But you could also see that players were anticipating when he was at the base of the ruck, like Mac Hansen in particular was making these runs that he wasn't making in the first half. I don't know if the game just broke up and that's what happens, or if if Mac Hansen makes the run because he knows he's going to get the ball, whereas he doesn't make the run because it's not really Conor Murray's game to play those little kind of run one way, look the other, pass it back. What's that about?
Probably a little from little column A, little column B. You know, the game does break up. Maybe there is that sense of understanding someone's game plan, having drilled it all week of training. You know, there's a huge aspect of telepathy between combinations, wings and nines in particular, playing off one another's shoulders, having that communication. Sometimes there isn't the opportunity to even converse, but yet visually you just spot one another, a quick glance and a knowing look, and all of a sudden you're away, or you shout something in a phase in advance saying where you're going to be. So those kind of micro conversations are really important. And listen, I suppose, would it shock us, considering Conor Murray's really gone away from his running game, that there isn't that level of comfort with Mac Hansen running lines off him? Probably not. It's unfortunate and almost a bit ironic that Conor Murray hurt his groin as he was having, you know, a rare break, which actually, you know, was great to see again. So it does feel as though, you know, I saw you include Gibson Park in that Johnny Sexton conversation. I 100% think he's part of that level of importance of this Irish team and how they play the game, the tempo which they play with, the variety with which they play with, real heads up, because he can have a go, he can have a snipe himself. He could box kick it or kick it in behind you, look for a 50-22, or he could whip those passes out on either side, not knowing where when he's running to the ruck, which side it's going to be. So that element of surprise, I think, is as much for the attack as it is for the defence.
So he was obviously injured as well after the summer tour and hadn't played a whole heap of rugby, if any, in advance of the South Africa game. And so, you know, you can understand why they put him on the bench. There was also a theory that we're going to start this game with Conor Murray. His defence is excellent. And then after we see exactly what challenge is going to be, Gibson Park is going to come on, and like, is there any thought that might have been not just connected to fitness, or that actually could have been a strategic decision? These two scrum halves are going to see us across the 80 minutes, and we want to get Conor established, get him in there, remind South Africa that we're big physical and they're not going to be able to run down our channel. And then as the game goes on and they get tired, on comes Gibson Park to light the torch.
Yeah, hard to argue with that. I know there's not a huge amount of sentiment anymore in rugby, but it was Conor Murray's 100th cap. It's, you know, much nicer to be able to run out when you've done the job that he's done over a 10, 11-year period. Sometimes it's nice to feel as though you can reward those guys with an opportunity to run out, lead the team out. That's a special moment for him and his family. So maybe there was an element of that in there, adding to the decision that, you know, Gibson Park had played no rugby and maybe he was better off playing 25, 30 minutes, albeit he ended up playing 65, 70 minutes. So I think there's probably a couple of factors involved in that decision-making. predominantly that Gibson Park had no rugby played, and that the last thing you want to do is bring a guy in from the start. And you have to remember too the distance that nines cover comparatively to everybody else. Like it's like being a marathon runner across this a long distance runner. Like it's relentless. It's absolutely relentless, and it's not for the faint-hearted. So I think you have to realize that as much training that he would have done in advance of that tempo and intensity of international, making decisions, throwing passes, playing for 2.5, 3 minute sequences, that is savage on the lungs. And so let the guy ease himself into the game with 25, 30 minutes, albeit that's not what happened.
I don't know if I'm lulling myself into this, but it certainly seems like these November internationals have been very, very intense in a way that maybe, a year out from World Cup, previous November internationals haven't been as intense. I'm using the first half in particular of the Australia-France game, which was sensational. Australia scored some of the best tries. It reminded me of what was Czech's sidekick, Knox? What was his first name?
Yeah, David Knox.
We did a game one time where he was in the stands, up in the stands,
abusing people.
Well, actually, shouting, "Go! It's on!" You can hear him in the commentary telling everybody that it's on, and whoever was playing, you were under your own posts, and obviously you do end up scoring several of those tries, notably against Toulouse in the quarterfinals in Toulouse. And it's just that this Australian team seems born of or related to that heritage. Obviously they were Australian, probably there's some Randwick stuff in there that I'm not au fait enough with to go, okay, that looks, these guys have that. And it was brilliant, and I'm hoping that the intensity level here is going to carry on through, and that we can expect rugby of this quality from all of the teams in next year's World Cup.
Yeah, I think there's been really good rugby played in the last year. I think if you look, from a European point of view, URC, it's improving. I think the South African teams have really added to it. I think the Premiership has been really good. Six Nations has been exciting. There's been some great games, both very physical, attritional, but also some terrific tries scored, some great individual and team performances. So I do feel as though rugby's in a good spot. I think lots more teams are going to the corner looking for 5 and 7 pointers rather than kicking their goals, thinking that'll be enough. I think that's been a real change of mindset, something that Ireland have been doing for a few years now with mixed success, but more success than not. So it does feel as though there's a realization that you've got to score, 4 or 5 tries to win games, because in all likelihood and against the best attacking teams that you're going to concede 3 or 4. And if you even look at the Australian game at last weekend, they scored 4 and Italy scored 3, but their discipline killed them. Gave away 16 penalties. So you still have to be mindful that teams can keep that scoreboard ticking over. It's not all about scoring tries. But lots of teams realise that, and we copped onto it back in 2016 against the All Blacks in Soldier Field. It was like, we're going to have to score tries to beat these. We're not going to, kick them to death. So, and they got 5 tries that day. So that's where the game has gone. It does feel as though it's opened up, as much as defences have gotten very impressive and not impenetrable, but very impressive and organised. Attacks likewise have really progressed as well, and lots more creation of opportunities have come to pass. So I think the game is in a good spot, and we should get excited about the prospect of what the World Cup might offer in a year's time.
Yeah, maybe with the exception of South Africa, who continue to be a blight on the...
Anyway. Okay, there's always an outlier, right? There is, okay? And they'll,
counter-cyclical South Africa, yeah.
But they certainly aren't looking for our approval.
No, they do not care.
No, they really don't care. And they'll tell you that it's World Cup winning rugby, and they've got 3, and we've never won a knockout match in the World Cup, and that softens your cough fairly lively. So, all you can do, it's all. Would we take a World Cup playing South Africans' way? I think we would. So it's all well and good playing the fantastic brand of rugby, but that has to be winning rugby too. And in 11 months' time, that'll be all important.
Look, absolutely. And every single decision that gets made now will, in retrospect, have been the greatest decision of all time or the worst decision of all time,
Correct.
depending on, what way the referee waves his arm for the last 5 minutes of the game against South Africa or whoever we play in a quarter-final, assuming we make it there. Just one quick thing on... So, Rassie Erasmus is playing one of the highest stakes game of poker that any coach in any sport has ever played, because... I can't even remember who it was now. I think it might have been Monday Night Rugby a couple of weeks ago. Going, these referees all have egos. They're not going to be backing down because Rassie's telling them, you're going to whistle too easy. They're like, yeah, I'm gonna stand up to you, Rassie. I never thought about that whole aspect of you're going to pick on somebody your own size, Rassie. Says macho referee X. I'm like, it's a good point here. He could actually provoke them into being complete shitheads to him.
Yeah, it could, and I think you've only so many goes at this, at what he's doing. Obviously, it worked well for him in the Lions tour and in that video and that outburst, and obviously what came to pass in the second test worked in their favour. And will put a lot of it down to that decision making, those 50-50 calls. The referee, even in his subconscious, felt squeezed into scrutinising every decision, and maybe on the 50-50 calls, people will feel he swayed on the side of South Africa. That's subjective, to be honest with you. But I think that the tide does feel as though it's turning, definitely outside of South Africa, that people just don't have any time for this nonsense. And it does feel as though there's a bit of a cult over there of what Rassie says. Is gospel, and that's fine. That's their prerogative. But the rest of the world opinion is that this is a bit it's unsavory. It's a bit childish at times. It's not in the ethos of rugby, and it's a bit disappointing, to be honest with you. Whether World Rugby have anything in them to actually follow up on their original impose sanctions on him, I will have to wait and see. I don't think so, because he's phrasing it in such a way that that he obviously is being massively sarcastic, but yet
in the court of law,
who are you to decide whether something's sarcasm or not? That's only in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah. So at some point maybe he'll forget to delete the draft and the tweet will become public, and I'm like, oh balls, I didn't mean to send that one. That was what I actually thought, as opposed to the sarcasm version of it. Notwithstanding that, what do you expect from Australia then this weekend?
Good question. Obviously, there's such a mixed bag. I saw Johnny Sexton's comments today. Obviously they're not underestimating them, and they're dead right, because Australia are capable of great things, but I don't know if I would use the term an outstanding side. I think they have the potential to be a very, very good side, but at the moment an inconsistent side. And that's not just the loss last weekend against Italy. I just think over the course of the Rugby Championship, we've seen some really good stuff and some pretty average stuff as well. And by their very high standards, I think they would say that they're dipping below the level of expectation of where Australia rugby should be. That said, when you've got lots of very skilled individuals like they do have, and I still don't know if they fully know what their best team is, and there's kind of chopping and changing of different partnerships and different combinations. But Johnny did say one thing, that there's lots of talented individuals, and I agree with him on that point. There's guys that have really, really good rugby IQ, very high skill levels, and they're a team that have always played heads up. Watch the picture in front of you and counter it with an alternative that they think will break it down, rather than being very programmed like some other teams, like South Africa, like Ireland 4 years ago. I think they're a team that has an ability to be able to read the game well, and when they click, that's why they can pull teams apart and look like world beaters. But when they're a little bit off on the physical side, and when they don't get the platform to allow those game players to actually create the space and put their faster players into positions that they'll cause threats, I think they can look very, very average. And their Achilles heel has been their ability to actually create a platform in the past where their pack has gone backwards against some of the better teams in the world.
The difference in approach that they take is going to be a completely different threat to Ireland's defence. And actually, that's what you want here out from World Cup. You see what you do against South Africa and their big bruisers. Now we're going to see what we do against the lightning quick pace if they manage to get it, and if the platform is given to them. I see Skelton's on the bench, so maybe that's good from an Ireland perspective. Although him coming on would be great.
No, it's not. But I totally agree with you. I think you don't want to feel as though you're learning to defend one type of defensive system. And you know what Fiji offered last weekend was totally different to South Africa, which will be totally different to Australia. You want that mass variety to be able to have a system that can react and adjust to whatever is thrown at them. And by Ireland standards, it probably, I'm conscious of not being too stat heavy when I look at and letting the stats completely dictate things. But I think we only had like a 79% tackle success rate last weekend. That's very, very average. And that said, Australia only had an 81%. So if you're missing 20% of your tackles, you know you're gonna leave yourself exposed. So I think Ireland's defence has been a real strong point. All the attack has been given the kudos and gotten the column inches, but for me the defence has been really outstanding this last year, suffocating, working in unison, combinations, really understanding what they're trying to achieve every time something's thrown at them, an ability to get up off the floor, plug in holes where would-be players are out of play through injury or just taken out of position. So I think that's been a real strong point of Ireland's play in the last year or 18 months, and you'd hope that they'll be tested but push back up closer to 90% tackle success, which will limit Australia's opportunities.
Okay, before we finish up, I do want to talk to you about the World Cup final last week. Was it only last week? It feels like it was longer ago. Yeah. What a sensational occasion and a sensational game, and ultimately heartbreak for England at the end. But while we obviously get fed a diet of how great the English team is through their media, that New Zealand team has been building for a long period of time and has had their own heartbreak in the past, and has had their own kind of path to this success as well. So it was quite an intriguing fixture that lived up to the hype.
Honestly, it was a brilliant game. And I think what a brilliant advert it was for the women's game. I think the reality is, if you look at this World Cup that's just gone by, and I saw a small bit of the group stages, I saw the semi-finals and the final in entirety. I think we all know that the women's game at the very highest end is very entertaining and very close. Not much between the top four teams. The problem is the quality of opposition when you get to quarterfinal level, and that's what we're chasing. That's what is the next movement for the women's game, and you can really see the difference between professional, semi-professionals, and amateur players. And that next iteration, the next progression, be it 4 years or 8 years, the big thing for World Rugby, the focus should be about developing all those teams that are likely quarterfinalists to try and get them those games a little bit more competitive. At the moment, there was never any doubt that it was going to be New Zealand, England, France, and probably Canada getting into the semi-finals. And there was years of that in the men's game, let's be honest. 20, 25 years ago, it was New Zealand, South Africa, Australia, England, Wales very early on in '87. Whereas now you've got Argentina's, you've got, Ireland in the mix, you've got Scotland have been in a semi-final and we haven't. So does feel as though there are more teams capable of getting into the last four. But to go back to the game, it was end to end, lead constantly change hands, totally different styles of play, where England's maul was their massive threat. And someone said to me, if you had given England the opportunity, or said at the start of the tournament that with the clock almost in the red, you'll have a line out 5 meters out to go and win the game, maul it over, they would have bitten your hand off, because that was their great strength. And it just showed that, it wasn't even a bad throw. It was just, they a bit like England in 2015, they bottled it a small bit with their option at line out. They went fast at 2. They had to be brave, try and throw to the middle. And once it's caught in the middle, that's game over for England. Their maul was that much different. But then Conversely, the style of New Zealand, their offloading, their willingness to play, and some of the tries they scored and created were sensational too. So worthy winners, but England will be devastated not to have picked up a victory, having won 29 in the bounce before that.
Speaking of England, you might have missed this while you were away, that the Babas were in London and they were, doing press, and both of the joint coaches were, Scott Roberts and Ronan O'Gara, were both touted by the English media as potential future England coaches. The England CEO is now not quite reversed his position, but certainly he was like, we definitely prefer an Englishman. That's definitely going to be an Englishman. And I was like, well, I never actually said that. I said it would be the best person for the job. Be ideal if that was an English person, but might not be. And Scott Robertson's clearly not going to get the New Zealand gig next, it looks like.
No. But Joe Schmidt's going to get the gig next time, That's the reality of it. He doesn't want it. He doesn't want it, but he's going to potentially be offered it. It doesn't look as though Scott Robertson is going to be in line, and I don't know. There's lots of stuff going on behind the scenes that I don't fully understand in New Zealand. There's Chinese whispers about contracts having been offered and then reneged upon with Scott Robertson, and I think he probably feels a bit disgruntled about how he's been treated down there, and how the way he's been talking about wanting to potentially bring two teams to a World Cup, win the World Cup with two different sides, just shows that he's got ambition to play, to go to international rugby next. I think his time with the Crusaders does feel as though it's probably up. He wants to become an international coach. There was no coincidence that he came over for the Babas, at this time to go and chat in England against an All Black 15. I'm sure there were conversations held with him and the powers that be. The only thing is, I do know that Bill Sweeney, the CEO, the RFU CEO, was down in New Zealand for the entirety of the Women's Rugby World Cup. So it would have been a Zoom call, him coming in to talk to Robertson. And perhaps Robertson actually met him before he came out for that Babas game and had a conversation around it. But you'd have to think that he is very much in the conversation, as I'm sure potentially Rog is as well, or as a partnership. Again, they clearly get on well. They've got a great relationship. So, Robertson's not going to do it on his own. Would he be thrilled to bring in someone like Ronan O'Gara? Is it the perfect fit for Rog to come in as an assistant coach internationally? Albeit he'd have to leave Ilderay, and I'm not sure if he's ready to do that yet.
Well, you could always live there and commute. There's a tiny little airport, loads of good flights to London.
That's true. But he's got a good thing going there as well, and he'll say that he's just, he's standing on his own 2 feet as a head coach for the first time, his second year of it. Does he want to relinquish that and become a number 2 again, albeit at international? I don't know. International is where these coaches want to be, though. They do. The reality is, and Michael Cheika, once he went to international, he was like, "Oh, mate, I don't necessarily want to go back to coaching a club again." It's like, you've got 10 games a year. You get to go to lots of games. You're in and out of camp. It's not like the all-consuming aspect that a head coach of a club team is. It's more than 24/7. With coaching, and I see it with ex-teammates. I see it with others.
You've got job security
invested in it
as well. In a weird way, your job security is like largely a World Cup cycle, unless you make a complete hames of it.
Yeah. That basically, yeah. So, but there's a hell of a lot more scrutiny. A club is just a group, a city, or a supporter base. 65 million people in England. Okay, not all of them are rugby fans, but you're going to have a huge amount of scrutiny. Life is going to be very different than it was beforehand. So you have to take all of that into account as well, and allow that to be part of your decision-making process.
Apparently we're going to know kind of February, March, so not that long to wait for us to find out who Eddie Jones' successor is going to be. I hadn't thought of the Dream Team reuniting for that. The December... Avengers Reassemble could be an interesting. Yeah. It's not about.
Maybe Eddie will do a third. Will do a third stint, will he?
Even if he wins it, I think they'll be like, "Thanks very much, Eddie. It's not you, it's us."
Yeah. No, very much. So I think everyone is ready to move on to pastures new.
Give me a prediction for the Ireland Australia game.
I think we'll win. I think it'll be a good game, but I think we'll have too much. I think we'll just create too many chances. From what I've seen in recent games of both teams. So I'm going to say Ireland by 8 or 9.
All right, very good. I think spread's about 12, so it's a bit tighter. It's definitely going to be, it has the potential to be a classic either way. Brian, great stuff. Thanks a million for joining us.